Well, Kathy and I really enjoyed our trip, but we did miss you and wish we could have been here last Sunday, and I understand that you had a wonderful service. I wish we could have heard Jerry preach. But we are very delighted to be back here in East Tennessee. If I had to choose between living in northern Arizona and East Tennessee, the decision would be easy. It would be living here in this beautiful paradise of East Tennessee. In the year that I was born, which I will not reveal, J.B. Phillips, Anglican priest and Bible translator, wrote a book entitled, "Your God is Too Small." Many people, argued Phillips, are laboring under a misconception of God. For some people, God is Santa Claus, writ large. For some, he is a stern and distant father. For some, he is a policeman. For others, he is a CEO who has little or no time for the little guy. Some of our images that we have of God claim a connection with stories or passages in the Bible. For example, God is love. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. Or, God is a consuming fire. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29. And then there are descriptions of God that are given in some visions in the Bible. For example, in the words of Isaiah, "I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance upon him. They were above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. And with 2 they flew. And one called to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is full of his glory." The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voice of those who called, and the house was filled with smoke. Well, this morning's text is a picture of God that was given by Jesus on an occasion when he called out the scribes and the Pharisees. They accused him of cavorting with Jewish tax collectors and other shameless sinners of the same ilk. I want you to listen very carefully as I read from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. I'll start reading with verse 11 and read through verse 32. Listen very carefully to this parable, which says something incredibly important and beautiful about God our Father. Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided the property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he went off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and now he is alive. He was lost and is now found. And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fat calf because he got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came outside and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And then the father said to him, son, you were always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. This parable, like love, is a many-splendored thing. It's a story about the stupidity of youth. It's a story about the shattering of a family. It's a story about estranged siblings. A story about hitting rock bottom. A story about redemption. And a story with an unresolved ending. It's also, especially, a story about a father. The father plays a prominent role in every act of this dramatic parable. Being a father, or being a mother for that matter, isn't an easy role to play. It exposes us to ingratitude, sometimes to insult, sometimes to disgrace, to the worst kind of worry, and to an incomparable degree of exhilaration and joy when our children love us and they're faring well. The father in our story has two sons. The younger demands his share of the inheritance. Now, even if he had asked for it, such a request would have ripped the father's heart out of him and shamed him in the eyes of all of his neighbors. This young ingrate couldn't even wait for his father to die. He conveniently forgot about the responsibility to take care of his parents in their latter years. He left that burden for the older brother. But the father complied with his son's demand, even though it would leave him looking weak and foolish in the eyes of the village. There is a rabbinic saying that 3 cry out and are not consoled. He who has money and lends it without witnesses. He who acquires a master, and he who transfers property to his children in his lifetime. I remember very well taking our son Lee to Milligan College for his freshman year. More years ago than I'm here to count. We helped him move in the dorm, and then we stayed with him from Friday until Sunday. He had chosen to attend Milligan even though he didn't know a single soul on campus. On Sunday afternoon, we said our goodbyes in front of his dorm. And then as we drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror, and there I saw a small reflection of my son waving goodbye as we drove off. For the space of an hour, Kathy and I could not speak a single word. That was a tough experience. Of course, little did I know he had lined up being a professor there one day. That would have made it a little easier, I think. But how much more painful it would have been if my son had demanded the equivalent of his college money so he could get out of Dodge, get away from his old man, and plunge into an alternative lifestyle that would have embarrassed his family and made us sick with worry. I don't know how long the prodigal's father had to wait. It must have seemed like an eternity. I'm sure that his father feared that he would never, ever see his son again. His son had burned all of his bridges behind him. He could return with honor, at least with some honor, if he struck it rich and then returned to lavish his wealth on his family and on his village. But the father knew better than to hope for such an improbable scenario. One day, though, the old man scanned the horizon, and far down the road he sees a small figure approaching. He was disheveled and far thinner than he had been when he left, but there was no mistaking him. It was the boy. It was his boy. A boy who had been given up for dead. A son who had been dead for all practical purposes. But in Jesus' day, this boy would have been greeted by the contempt of his village. Perhaps even the contempt of his parents. And even more likely his siblings. He had stupidly lost a good bit of the family's wealth. And to Gentiles, no doubt. The Jewish Talmud, collection of Jewish law and guidance about how to keep the law of Moses, the Talmud describes a ceremony in dealing for just such a child. The ceremony was called the katsatsa. If the good-for-nothing ever showed up in the village again, his neighbors would take a large clay pot, fill it with burned nuts and grain, and then in the presence of the returning disgraced boy, would shout his name and pronounce him cut off. He would now become an orphan with no family and no village. So, what will the father do when he sees his boy coming home? Will he maintain what little honor he has left by standing with the village and his older son and dishing out the shame that this prodigal boy so richly deserved? He will not. His compassionate love for his son will motivate him to do one of those things that patriarchs simply do not do. The father runs to his son. Runs so that everybody can see his pale ankles. Runs so that his robes get wedged in between his legs and flutter out from behind like an apron. He runs like a girl, like a mother instead of a father. He runs and puts his arms around his son and kisses him right there on the road where everyone can see them. By such an undignified display, the old man saves his son from the rejection and the abuse that he would have received, no doubt, from his village. The father will lose honor in the eyes of anyone who sees him behaving like this, but he's willing to pay that price in order to have his son back and protected by his family's honor. Immediately, the father shows his son and the rest of the household that his rebel child will be received back as a son. He will have nothing but the best robe, the family ring, sandals, and a banquet in his honor. Not a goat, a lamb, or a few chickens will be slaughtered, but the fattened calf. This signifies a meal of veal, rhymes, doesn't it? A meal of veal for the entire village. For the sake of this troublemaking son, the father throws a banquet before the village can throw a katsatsa. The old man puts the reconciliation of his family far above his own reputation as a great patriarch. But, as you well know, the story in the parable is not over. There is another son who is in need, desperate need, of reconciliation. To his sorry brother, of course, but also to his father. And when he learns that his brother has returned and that his father is throwing a party for him, he refuses to come. After all, what kind of justice would it be for his good-for-nothing brother to be treated like a returning hero, while he, the loyal, faithful, righteous son, should have to play second fiddle? What an insult to his honor! No, he will not go along with such travesty. And by so refusing, this righteous son publicly insulted his father as well as his brother. So again, the old man demotes himself in the eyes of his guests by leaving his guests to go outside and try to reason with his other prodigal son. His honor means less than the reconciliation and the harmony of his two boys. He pleads with the older boy to open his eyes and see what has just happened. His younger brother has been raised from the dead, as it were. Surely, this trumps all other considerations. Surely, dancing and music and feasting are the only conceivable response. You know, in this famous parable, neither son is virtuous or even likable. But in both cases, the father desperately wants his two boys to be at home with him and reconcile to each other. His attempts to make it so have cost him. They have cost him honor in the eyes of his family and friends and neighbors. But he will not be deterred. He loves his sons, not because of what they were, but because of who they were. They were his sons. And to have them under one roof and in harmony with one another more than justified the sacrifice of his reputation as the strong and unyielding patriarch of the clan. Now, here's the rest of the story. Here's the bombshell. This father, in Luke 15, is our God. Our God is the one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And our God is this Father in Jesus' story. Yes, there are other pictures, other images of God in the Bible, but none of them should be interpreted in such a way as to detract from or nullify this picture of God that Jesus gives to us. Does this God melt your hard heart as if it were wax? Is this God easy to love and to live with? Is this God worthy of continual praise? Is it worth our time and our effort to serve such a God as this? Can we be so proud of such a God that we'll make efforts to make him known to our families and our friends and our neighbors? If you're one of these two lost boys, why don't you drop the self-centeredness and the pride that keeps you at a distance from your Father's embrace? Why don't you face the truth? He really is your Father, and he loves you more than you love yourself. He woos you as he attempted to woo the older brother. When he sees you on the horizon, he'll run to you, kiss you like a mother, throw a great party to celebrate your presence with him. Why don't you come to the waiting Father? Jim's going to lead us in a song of invitation in just one moment. But if you need to respond, to this Father God of ours in the way that the younger brother responded by returning, or if you need to respond in the way that the older brother needed to respond, then why don't you do that now while we stand and sing?